Hey, Alex, welcome to the show.
Steve, I'm so honored to be here, man.
It's been, I feel as though, and we were talking about this before, I feel as though we've known each other, as you were saying, for decades. And I mentioned earlier that I got a picture out from when I was honored to speak at the Pentagon. And there was your smiley face because you too had the amazing honor. And we both spoke along with Greg Reed, Charlie Hone, Grant Cardone at the Pentagon. What was that, like 10 years ago nearly?
Something like that. So I think you and I have known each other since 2014. And I think that Pentagon trip was probably like 15 or 16, something like that.
Wow, damn, time flows through. Now, I've always known you as the structure strategy guy. You know, you've literally gone up to people, identified 9 times out of 10 before they have that entrepreneurial strengths, and then how to strategize for that scalability. Because let's be serious, as entrepreneurs, we're dysfunctional weirdos, and we can often be the death of our own great visions. You brought these systems and structures into it. How come that became your unicorn, your super strength?
You know, Steve, I think it's probably because it was my biggest weakness. You know, when I look at what we do as visionary entrepreneurs, we're that small percentage of the population that gets up every day. We travel into the future. We create a new reality. We come back to the present and demand it becomes real. And as visionaries, you know, that trip into the future, that's a very natural process for us. In fact, we spend a lot of time in the future. We spend a lot of time in ideation. We spend a lot of time in problem solving. You know, I always joke that entrepreneurs, regardless of where we are, we've redesigned the experience before we're done, whether it's a yogurt shop or a restaurant or anywhere else. Like, don't you find yourself doing that? Like, oh, if they would only move this around and do this, it's like our mind's always doing that. And, you know, what I realized as a younger entrepreneur, when I look back at my career, I fought structure, process, and routine. I wanted to be spontaneous. I didn't want the same meeting on my schedule all the time, but I wanted to have a massive impact. And so as I allowed structure and process and routine into my life, that's where my businesses took off. And so, you know, the more that I've allowed for structure, the more that I've accepted routine and created routine, the more that I've really leaned into process, the more I don't have to be involved with everything. And as a visionary, I want to stay in that place of ideation, not in that place of day-to-day tactical operation. And what replaces the entrepreneur in the day-to-day tactical operation is process, structure, routine. When you allow your company to have those things, you don't have to be there as much.
Now, I'm glad you said that it was a pain and a problem you had, because you've openly said that you didn't have that and everything went wrong. And as entrepreneurs, we actually solved the problems that we had. You went through some dark times, which ended up being your greatest education. Would you be vulnerable enough to open up on those?
Oh, Steve, I mean, you know, I'm 48 and I've been running businesses since I was 18. So when you say, would you open up on dark times? It's like, which dark times? You know, when I look at myself as a 20-year-old business owner, you know, I grew a multi-million-dollar company that worked with multinational corporations like Fuji and Targus and Memorex and big organizations like Home Shopping Network and Office Depot and Radio Shack. Like, I'm dating myself since some of these companies are barely anything anymore, right? But you know, we were responsible for over $250 million in sales, and I didn't have a lot of process. I didn't have a lot of structure. I ran things through force of personality. So in my early, you know, when I was in my teens, I actually did some modeling out in California. Now, I don't say that to brag. I just say that to draw contrast. I went from being on runways at shows to when I was 32, I was 300 pounds on 4 different prescription medications. I was about to be given a 5th. I was completely unhealthy. My doctor told me I was his most likely candidate for a heart attack. And the reason was I was running my business day to day as the person who made all the trains run. So I literally, if I didn't show up for a day, things didn't happen. I had a 50-person team, and all they were was support for me, because there was no process, no structure, no routine. It was like I had to tell everybody transactionally what to do. And so it was such a massive pain point for me that in the next business I started, I did things differently. And the next business after that, I did things differently. And now since about 2011, we've been holding events, and I've been one-on-one coaching. And then there's been this evolution from events to one-on-one coaching to now we have a business where we show entrepreneurs and their operators, the people that they work with, how to get the entrepreneur into what we call the passenger seat. And so, you know, it went from like my biggest weakness to now we show entrepreneurs how to go from really doing everything themselves and feeling like they have to drive the business to where they can passively run a company from a passenger seat where they're not driving meetings, they're not driving the calendar, they're not even driving outcomes. They're providing that high level visionary inspiration, and that's where the genius is for most of us. And so, I look at it as the less tactically involved we are in our company, the more strategically we will think, and the more visionary we will become.
Yeah, but that's a tough lesson to get into an entrepreneur's head.
Oh my God.
An entrepreneur, we're pickheaded, and you said it quite appropriately. And I know I've been in the exact same position. Is that our personality and our power is so strong that while we think we've got a person team around, we've only literally got 50 people waiting for instruction. Yep. And if we don't give them the instruction, nothing happens. And we've got to get over that, which is basically a form of ego within entrepreneurship. How do you get through to that client? How do you get through to that entrepreneur before they've gone bankrupt, before they've gone broke, and had it abruptly brought to their attention that actually they aren't controlling of everything?
Yeah. Steve, it's not easy. It's not easy because I face myself as a potential client all the time. And when I was younger, I would say things like, I don't want the same meeting on my schedule. I don't want to be in a routine. I want to be spontaneous. I did this so that I wouldn't have to work a 9 to 5. And, I think one of the most powerful arguments we make with entrepreneurs is that, look, we've looked at hundreds, now at this point it's thousands, maybe tens of thousands of time studies of entrepreneurs where we've analyzed their time for 2 weeks and we look at what they're doing. And the average entrepreneur who wants freedom and who wants, to be able to be spontaneous is spending somewhere between 50 to 75% of their time just getting the business to run, just getting everybody to do what they need to do. If you're working 2,000 hours a week, which we've rarely found 2,000 hours a year, which we've rarely found an entrepreneur that does 40 hours a week. It's usually 40 to 60, sometimes as high as 75. They're usually spending 50 to 75% of that time on just doing this. So Steve, that's somewhere around 1,000 hours a year up to about 2,250 hours a year. So we see entrepreneurs all the time that are spending more than a full-time job just getting the trains to run on time in their business. We show them a process through which, with intentional involvement rather than sporadic personality involvement, with intentional involvement, we show them how to take that number down to about 300 hours a year. And, in our membership, our masterminds, the people we work with, we're known for taking entrepreneurs out of the pain of running a business. And then they start doing the things we need to do as entrepreneurs. They understand themselves better. They start doing more self-care. They start doing the trauma therapy that they probably should have done a long time ago. They start really understand, and they start really seeing their potential and their power and where their strengths are. And so, we routinely take people from, like, a good example is a guy that we work with right now, a close friend of mine, actually. His name's Daniel Rosen. He runs a company called Credit Repair Cloud. When he started with us, he had been at 2 million, around between 1 and 2 million for like 6 years. I don't know if you've ever been stuck like that, Steve, but it's like you start doubting yourself, you start doubting the world, you start doubting your higher power, you start doubting everything. And he came to us and we showed him how to put some process in his company, put some routine in the company. We started with him in 2018. This year, they expect to hit 30 million. They're already at 25. They expect to hit 30 million before the end of the year. Daniel's doing less than he ever has done in the company. He actually has a role that he fills in the company of, like, the guy who goes on video, the guy who goes on Facebook Lives. And the business is now, it's not run by his personality. It's run by a planning system and a communication system and a structure so that he can go do the things that he's always wanted to do. I think we're entrepreneurs, the joke is, we give up a 9 to 5 so that we can work a 9 to 9. And, and when you add some process and structure, you get to the place where you actually start getting the freedom you want. But, Steve, it's interesting. What often happens when we're working with entrepreneurs is the more that they are able to offload, the more time that they get back, the more insecure and uncomfortable it gets. Because when all your time's taken up, there's so much noise going on, you don't ever have time to yourself. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, one of the conversations I have with entrepreneurs often is, okay, so here's what you do with your time now that you have it. And what we see when people are not in our program, and even sometimes people in our program, things will start running really smoothly. They're not as necessary. They're not as, people aren't asking them questions 25 times a day. And then they'll go and start a fire in the business. They'll go change things or screw things up. And then, they now feel vital and they feel necessary all the time. And then they feel necessary again. We tell people, anyone who's always fighting fires, you know what you call that person? an arsonist. And so you need to put the matches down and like let the business grow in a way that is predictable, in a way that is simple, in a way that lowers the noise and doesn't need to change every 2 weeks.
So there's a couple of things in there. Actually, there's quite a lot in there, and I felt exactly what you're talking about. I love the statement intentional involvement. And that was a beautiful way, because there's a difference between being involved in your business and intentionally involved with that focus. But then there's two other things to preach on. I remember when I started building systems into my business, I had that time and I would sit there literally and go, shit, what do I do?
Yeah.
And as an entrepreneur, you need to be needed. You need to feel as though the company needs to run on you. And here's the other thing, the planet, the social platforms, and we had this conversation just before we went on air, tell us that we have to be the face and the brand of the company. And that's a cog. It's not the whole company, but you think just because you're the face of it, hey, it can't exist without you. You need to be smart enough to realize you need to put other people in there that can run the business. So again, the classic line, you're not working in it, you're working on it.
Yeah.
But that's going against everything an entrepreneur lives by. An entrepreneur needs to be the person that you need. And you're right. You become the arsonist of your own business. And as you mentioned that, I'm sitting here going, oh, my God, I know the fires I started just to look important in my own business.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I think, as entrepreneurs, we need to collectively let ourselves off the hook for this, but we need to understand why we have these behaviors. And, I've studied, I don't have a formal education, but I think you're in the same boat, right? Formal education from being a bouncer and shit like that.
Yeah, the best education.
Right, exactly. My school was a school of hard knocks. But not having a formal education doesn't mean that I'm not incredibly well educated. In fact, sometimes a lot more than people who have a formal education. I've studied a ton of psychology. And when you look at what starting a business does, in order to successfully start a business, you have to do everything. And starting a business, when I ask groups of entrepreneurs, how hard was it to start your business? The most dramatic answer I've ever gotten is a guy actually stood up in one of our rooms and he said, I had stage 4 testicular cancer. I had to have one of my testicles amputated or removed. It had gone into my lymph nodes. I had to do radiation therapy. I did all kinds of natural therapies. I'm over it. I got over it. It's now dormant or benign. It's not there for 5 or 6 years. And then he goes, starting my business was harder. And that was the most dramatic answer I've ever gotten. But when you think about that, we as entrepreneurs, we start a business and it is emotionally charged. It's difficult. It's traumatic. It tests us in ways that we never thought we would be tested. And we have to do everything to get it off the ground. So in order to successfully start, you do everything. The problem is that period of trauma, that period of difficulty conditions us to feel like we need to do everything. And so when we start giving things up, that conditioning kicks in and it's like, wait, I'm not doing enough. I need to do more. I need to push harder. I need to be more involved. I need to be more useful. I need to be more vital. I certainly don't want this business growing by itself. But if we slow things down and we back off, isn't that exactly what we want? I mean, isn't that really the dream of every entrepreneur, that we can say, hey, you know what? Here's my vision. This is the destination. Here's where we need to go. And your team gets out in front of you and knocks down that vision for you and does it for you. Like, that's our dream. And so we need to understand that early psychological conditioning in starting a business, and for many of us, it's in starting multiple and failing over and over and then finally breaking through, that once we have that business up and running, that is what's going to kill us moving forward. You know how they say what got you here won't get you there? That's like the polite way of saying it. I tell entrepreneurs, what got you here will put you in the hospital if you do it moving forward. It will get your cortisols all jacked up. You will have your hormones all over the place. You will have a hard time sitting, just being in a room with people if you try and do everything as your business scales to multiple millions. And so having that understanding of where that conditioning comes from often helps entrepreneurs start to move away from it and see a bigger picture.
Now, I remember one of the great philosophers of our time, Mike Tyson, turned around. He turned around and he said, everyone's got a strategy until they're punched in the face.
Yeah.
And as entrepreneurs, we think we've got everything until the world tells us, either by bankruptcy, by lawsuits, by patent infringement, by staff walking off and stealing your ideas, all of these other things. it informs us that we actually don't have as much control as we actually think we do. All of our education comes from 9 times out of 10 what went wrong, which 10 times out of 10 we created that situation for it to go wrong. What are the telltale signs for those entrepreneurs that at the moment are delusionally happy that they're actually heading for the wrong path? What are the telltale signs to tell them that they actually need to be getting people involved to actually build the systems that are there to support them, not steal their ideas, not steal their mojo, not make them be redundant, but help support that vision to greater action and impact?
Well, see, it's funny that entrepreneurs feel that way, that like they're going to steal the mojo, they're going to take it away, they're going to take my business. I look at some of the visionary entrepreneurs of our time, like Bezos, or I know you've met and you have a relationship with Elon Musk. I think he's like the most powerful example, because there's no way he could run SpaceX and Tesla and the solar company and the boring company and all these other things if he didn't release. What Elon Musk does incredibly well is he paints a vision and he walks away and lets people actually execute. And he builds systems where other people execute. So the biggest telltale sign is if your days are getting tactically harder, you're building a house of cards. And so the reverse of that means your day should actually be getting easier as your business scales. And entrepreneurs look at me cross-eyed when I say that. Now, if you're getting up to the point where you can build a team, then that early stages, yes, it's going to be really hard when you launch, and then it just keeps getting harder until you're over a couple $1 million and you can actually start building a team. So understand, if you're in those early stages, it's still going to be hard. You can't really use the metric or the statement I just gave you, especially like getting up to your first million. You are going to do a lot of that. But then once you start bringing in a team, once you start surrounding yourself with people, once you start building that support system, if you find that your days are still getting tactically harder, they're not easier, they're not more fun, they're not less stressful, then you're building a house of cards. And here's why I say that. As an entrepreneur, once we start building a team, wherever we're tactically involved is a liability in the company, because it's just us. And if we haven't built a process or a structure around what we need to do, we delegate to 4 things. As entrepreneurs, when we think delegation, we think delegate to people, and we have a hard time delegating to people. So then we just don't delegate. But if you really look at it as an entrepreneur, you can delegate to a project on your team. If there's something you're doing, your team builds a project to take that away from you. You can delegate to a process. If there's something you're doing over and over again, you delegate it to a process somebody else runs. You can delegate it to a person, which is the standard delegation we all think about. And here's one that nobody thinks about. You delegate to a policy. So if there's a recurring issue in your business, you build a policy around it. And so if your days are getting tactically harder, you need to take a step back and look at, what do I need to delegate? Where is the pain coming from? We have entrepreneurs do a time study, like I mentioned before, where for 2 weeks, they inventory everything they do for 2 weeks. Then we look at that 2-week inventory of time and we say, what on this list is strategic today, which means really no one else could do it. And you can't hire that right now. You don't have the resources. You must do it. And what is anything someone else could do? And we constantly transfer. We hold the strategic and transfer everything that's tactical. Hold the strategic, transfer everything that's tactical. And then what happens is, literally over time, by going through that process 3 or 4 times in a year, you go from spending a ton of time in tactics to a ton of time in strategy. And here's what we know. If we can take an entrepreneur's time from tactical to strategic, the business always grows. If we can take an entrepreneur out of tactics and not add anything to their plate at all, the business grows, because they're no longer doing it and they're no longer the liability. As entrepreneurs, the challenge is, when we start our business, we are the biggest bottleneck in the business because we have to do everything. Once we start bringing in a team, it is our responsibility to make sure we never become the biggest bottleneck again.
Wow, there is a ton to unload there. I love, and I've never ever heard delegate to a policy. That was, again, anyone listening to this, I know you're going to have to replay it a ton of times. I'm going to, but actually I've never, the concept of actually delegating to a policy makes total sense, but we overlook it so many times.
100%.
So we've discovered that, for us to scale, we need to be, somewhere in the business that adds to it, but but we need to focus on structures. We need to be able to scale the business. Okay. We find someone like I don't want to wait until the end. How can people find out about you, by the way?
Steve, the best place is to listen to our podcast, Momentum Podcast. It's called Momentum for the Entrepreneurial Personality Type. If you go to momentumpodcast.com. And then the second place is we have a framework called the Billionaire Code. And it's what you need to do at each stage of growth to go from 0 to 100 million, especially over that $1 million mark. And if you go to billionairecode.com, CODE, you can get the matrix so you know exactly where you are and understand where you are as an entrepreneur, what you should be focusing on. And every entrepreneur looks at our matrix, it's 9 levels, and they go, okay, I'm here. What do I need to do to get bigger? We actually tell entrepreneurs to look to the left, look at the earlier stages, build the foundation. If you're hitting a ceiling in your business, it's probably because the foundation isn't strong enough.
Wow. Okay. All right. So we're going to put those in the show notes. So if you didn't catch those by any chance, don't worry about it. Go back onto the stevedsims.com podcast and you'll see the show notes in there that will have those links actively in there. One of the things that I want to get over is the psychological resistance of entrepreneurs having nothing to do.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs sit there and they will not do a 9-to-5 job because they want to create freedom, and they create that freedom by shackling themselves to a liability, that company.
Yeah.
And then when they do things like sell the company, and we both know, we're both friends. We're both friends with Sean. We both know Joe Polish. We both know Tucker Max. All of these kind of people. We know people that have sold their businesses for millions and millions and millions of dollars. And then they're really depressed because all of a sudden it's kind of, what do I do? How do they handle that moment?
So, it's interesting that you say that. So I exited that company that I built in my 20s, and I exited right around 32 when I met Katie. And I was so excited. I'm like, I've got a chunk of money coming in. I don't really have to work. This is going to be great. Like, this is what I've always wanted. And it was the most difficult time in my life. It was like for a couple of days, it was okay. But then by day 3 or 4, the phone didn't ring. No emails came in. Nobody cared. Like, I had no significance. I had lost my significance. I lost my certainty. I'd lost my variety. It was like everything had become this massive challenge. So with entrepreneurs, when one of my friends is going to sell their company and exit their business, I look at it as an entrepreneur at risk. And I'll sit down with them and talk to them and say, like, look, we need 3 things to be in momentum as an entrepreneur. And if we're not in momentum, like, we need momentum like the rest of the world needs oxygen. When we get into a place of constraint, when we get into a place of not feeling necessary, when we get into a place of like not being able to see that future, travel into the future, create that new reality and come back to the present and demand it becomes real, we get into a depressive state. Like, you know what I'm talking about, Steve, when like you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel as an entrepreneur, when you're in that full place of full constraint, your body breaks down. So physiologically it affects us. Your decision-making gets difficult. So cognitively it affects us. And this is the big one. We actually feel chemically depressed from not having that feeling of momentum. And so when the way that we get past that is, we always, as entrepreneurs, I always say we're evolutionary hunters. We are that small percentage of the population that thousands of years ago, Steve, you and I and our tribe would be gathering up some sticks and stones, literally, and going out and killing something to keep the tribe alive. And so regardless of where we are, we should always have a destination we're working on. We should always be working on something. I remember years ago going to an event up in Canada, and I was sitting at a table with a guy who was a video expert. That's how he introduced himself, as a video expert. And I could just tell something was going on, and he probably wasn't a video expert. There was more to it. And I said, what do you mean you're a video expert? And he's like, well, I started this company. We had some compression software. We grew it to like 120 million. Google recently bought it. I now have FU money. And he's like, I bought a Ferrari. I bought a Lamborghini. I've gone racing. I have a boat. I am so fucking bored. And he was depressed. And he's like, I don't know what to do next. I don't know where I'm going next. And I'm like, man, here's the thing. You need 3 things. You need a clear outcome. Like, what am I going to do next? You need some type of a scoreboard that tells you whether you're winning and losing. And it doesn't even matter what type of a scoreboard it is. And you need to know what your involvement is and what the involvement of the people around you are. Like, who's going to help you? How are you going to do this? And he's like, well, what would you suggest? And I said, look, it doesn't matter. Like, clearly you're in pretty decent shape, but it looks like, maybe you're having some chemical issues. You're having some issues with confidence. You're having some issues with like figuring things out. Why don't you figure out some goal you can set for yourself physically? Like, run a marathon or do a triathlon or lose some weight, gain some weight, bench press 300 pounds, something like that, put a scoreboard around it and get some help with it. And he's like, it can't be that simple. And I said, okay, I'll challenge you. Like, do it and let me know if anything in your life shifts. I didn't see the guy again for probably 8 months. I got a message from him on Facebook. He said, I just, I put on 30 pounds of muscle. I'm working out like crazy. I feel better than I ever have. And I've started 3 companies that I've invested in with different entrepreneurs. And I'm having the time of my life. They're all growing and we're having a ball. And it's because when we get into momentum anywhere in our lives, we create momentum everywhere else.
Now, we're using those examples of people that have sold companies to get to the FU status.
Sure.
Okay. Surely those rules apply to people that suddenly start gaining hours. I remember when the structure started coming in, I'd wake up in the morning, I'd have breakfast, and whereas I would think, oh my God, it's coming up to 9 o'clock, I've got to get going. I didn't have to because everything was happening. So I could sit there longer. It takes a little bit of a control in yourself to be able to get to that. So you're talking about the physical focus when you've got the FU money. You can use that physical focus when you've just released a couple of extra hours in the day. Go to the gym, go and play squash, go for a walk down the beach, walk with your family, whatever. You don't have to look at the $1 billion buyout or the sellout to be able to focus on filling up that time with stuff that helps you so that you do
100%.
get away from that boredom. Because I think one of the dangers of us is that boredom. No good decision comes out of when you're bored. You start hunting for a way to fuck things up.
Yeah. And it's, Steve, it's even more than that. So, a lot of times, and I've talked a few times now about people who've made a lot of money, but let's talk about the people who maybe have a business where it's not where they want it to be. The business hasn't grown to the stage that they want. I've seen a corollary, like a strong correlation between when an entrepreneur doesn't take care of themselves, they are going to have issues with money. And people always challenge me on that. Like I tell people self-care is a gateway drug to success. And here's why. If you're not willing to take care of yourself, you're not willing to bring in the wealth that you want into your life. It's just how it works. And the more you take care of yourself, the more you like do what you said. You go for a walk, you pick up some physical pursuit, you go to therapy, you do some psychedelic therapy, you figure out more about yourself and who you are. You understand your trauma better. You understand how you show up in the world. You have a higher level of self-awareness. There is a massive correlation between doing those things and making more money. I actually have another client success story. It's one that really inspires me. It's a guy named Cosmo Khosravi, and he goes by Cosmo, and he has a line of products called Cosmo's Q. He's a barbecue guy. Steve, I didn't know this when I met Cosmo, but there's leagues of barbecue. Cosmo is a world championship pit master in the steak category, and he sponsors 7 other people in different categories. He's actually the largest sponsor of professional grill champions in the world.
Wow.
And when we started working with Cosmo, his business had just eclipsed $1 million. It's a physical products company. And he came in, and I think it was 2019, we started working together. And Cosmo, like every great entrepreneur, by the way, this is all of us, has some serious trauma. He was burned when he was a kid. He was in a ward in a hospital for years. His family kind of didn't really visit him a lot, didn't spend a lot of time with him. They had other kids. They did what they could, but he was kind of abandoned as a child. And he shared this with our entire team. There's actually a podcast on momentum. It's Cosmo's 10-minute talk that he did at one of our events. And he started, when he started working with us, he got some process, some structure, he got some time back, and he came and said, I don't know if I like this time back. And I'm like, Cosmo, this time's a gift so you can understand yourself better, so you can get clear on who you are. He started doing some EMDR therapy, started working directly with a therapist, started getting in a little bit better shape, paying more attention to himself. I'm not going to tell you it's exactly why the business grew, because they did a lot with process, structure, and routine, but his business went from a couple $2 million to over $25 million in a 3-year period. And if you ask him how that happened, it's because he understood himself better. He put time into himself. He realized how much of the trauma that he had as a child was showing up in day-to-day conversations with his team and holding everybody back. And by processing and understanding who he was and getting clear on it, he was able to let go of the business more. He was able to delegate more. He was able to trust the people around him. He actually realized that he had this lifelong issue with trust because of what had happened happened to him as a child. And so when you can't trust your team, you're going to have a hard time delegating to them. As soon as he's starting to let them in and started trusting them more and started building relationships with them, the business exploded. And I mean, I've got so many stories like this where entrepreneurs have been stuck in that high 6, low 7-figure range. And by starting to pay attention to themselves, by starting to clear some of that out, by understanding themselves better, their sexuality better, their passion better, the way that they show up in the world better, the business explodes. And to me, it's one of those non-linear strategies. A linear strategy is let's get more leads. An exponential growth non-linear strategy is let's understand ourselves better. So everywhere we show up, we vibrate at a different level. Everywhere we show up, we actually have the physicality and the psychology that's going to allow us to be successful. I think that's the biggest game changer for entrepreneurs.
So I'm hearing a thread that the entrepreneurs spend so much of our time focusing on their business and a lot of the time on what they shouldn't be focusing on, and very little focused on themselves.
100%.
So their mind, their body, their personal challenges, their relationships. And it's a sad thing, but, and I've said this before, but you go to so many entrepreneurial events and so many entrepreneurs are divorced.
Yeah.
Or they're not in a relationship. We're tough people to live with. Let's be honest. Our wives should get freaking medals.
Well, in my house, there's 2 entrepreneurs. She's an entrepreneur too. So we both it comes from both sides.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, exactly, Katie. So, all right. So I'm glad that we're focusing on that. So your podcast again, repeat the name of it for someone that can't see the show notes. What's the name of your podcast? It's really good, by the way. I vouch for it. I listen to it. I love it. What's the name of it?
Momentum for the entrepreneurial personality type, and it's on all the major platforms. If you type momentum, it'll come up.
All right. Alex, I know for a fact it's not going to be another 10 years before we hang out with each other, but we'll keep that quiet and secret. And I look forward to speaking with you again. I thank you very much for taking the time to share your wisdom with our people today.
Steve, this was so much fun, man. And, I appreciate our relationship so much and the longevity that it's had and the connection that we've had over time and the way that we've been able to help each other at different intersections of our lives. And so thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon.
All right, pal. Look after yourself. Bye.